I was saying that I will share some results of recent research on the use of fluid potassium fertilizer for side dressing. I like to recognize Louis Thompson. Louis Thompson is a ag specialist working in our group. He is the one that did most of the work in the field together with the superintendents of several research farms. Okay, why is that we are talking about P or K placement usually? P and K are kind of immobile nutrients in the soil, not in the plant. In the plant, they immobilize from older leaves to new leaves. But in the soil, they move much less than nitrate, for example. So both P and K need to reach the roots by diffusion through very short soil distances to the root surface. Some soils of other regions can retain a portion of applied P very strongly and change it to forms that have a somewhat low availability. This is called fixation. So with tillage, banding reduced the reaction of the applied fertilizer with the soil, and that way improves efficiency and uptake. Now, in no-till, this might not be the case because broadcast is like an horizontal band, you see? So the reaction with the soil is less there. Now, thick residue cover, especially with no-till, makes soil colder or wetter in early spring, especially here in Iowa, especially in northern Iowa. So subsurface banding of P mainly helps with early root and seedling growth. Now, in drier regions and without irrigation, shallow roots may not work well because the top 2 inches of soil may be dry frequently. So subsurface banding may increase the P or K uptake in those conditions. See, the other thing that people always talk a lot is about the stratification. Stratification means that, especially with no-till, but also with chisel plow, here you can see it here, you can see that the P in this case accumulates in the top 3 inches and just a little bit increase in the second 3 inches down the profile. With potassium, the stratification is not so bad because potassium moves a little bit more than P. But still we see that that's in the top. So people always is wondering, you know, if that is really available or not. So that's why there have been research on placement for 100 years. And we have done lots of research here in Iowa too. Now, when I came in, started working here as a postdoc in 1989, I was surprised that I did not see much placement research in Iowa at the time. I just knew that, excuse me, that during the 60s mainly, research with corn managed with tillage and with preplant P or K have found no difference between the placement, and actually 2 of the best senior soil fertility research here, like Reggie Voss, John Webb, you know, even John Pesek told me, Antonio, don't bother at working with placement, you know, there will not be much difference. So I didn't believe it, especially coming from South America. So I started in '94 a huge program about this, and you have seen some of these results. So we have long-term experiments at research farms that were closed recently. We have both no-till and tillage. And then in there, for a few years, of the early years, we try fall broadcast or deep band P or K, or banding with a planter with the 2x2 systems. These are dry fertilizers. Then over the years, we did like 42 strip trials at farmer fields with either corn or soybean. And there, the system was no-till, strip till, or ridge till. And then I also work a lot in starter, you know, mostly working in farmer fields, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So this is one example. This is a picture from the long-term study P&K placement at the research farm. the plots are kind of large, 60 feet long, 15 to 20 feet wide, depending on the farm. So I'm going to show just a few results of these experiments, before getting to the main talk. These are just averages for phosphorus. These are the early years from 94 to 2001 was experimental research farms. We have several rates of P, but I just averaged them because there was no difference in the placement between the rates. So you can see here we have on the left, the broadcast is the gray, deep band is yellow, planter band is the green. The deep band was about 5 to 6 inches deep. So there wasn't a difference between the placement with chisel plot management, and there was not much difference with no-till either. In soybean, there wasn't much, and in any case, since it was phosphorus, okay? So with potassium, we saw some differences. Here, in corn, we see that with the tillage, there's just a little bit, not statistically significant difference, improvement with the deep banding. But then when we go to no-till, there is some effect. Now, on average, this is percent. It's not that much, so sometimes it pays, sometimes it doesn't. But there is a response to deep band potassium. And then when we go to soybean, it's the same thing, you see, but a little bit less proportionally in soybean than in corn. So means that in these conditions, then the deep banding apparently improves in potassium. Now, these responses to potassium were not every year. They were mainly in the farms there was a dry period sometime in June, early July, not necessarily at silking. So when it was dry at the time, now all this was deep banded in the fall and broadcast too. That was when we saw this response. And that happened, of course, most often in Western Iowa. Now, one thing that we saw in this research is that here we have the early growth. So phosphorus, I mean, it doesn't matter where, with tillage or no till, you put some phosphorus in the band, and then it will increase that early growth, which in the old time used to be very important for weed control and a variety of things. I'm not sure it's so important now. Much research have shown that there is not much correlation between the early growth, development, speed, and yield then later on, but it could be. So we see that with early growth, the planted band phosphorus really increases, early growth compared with broadcast or deep, both with tillage and no-till actually. But then when we go to potassium, there is not much effect with tillage, and there is only a little bit with no-till. You see, it has been shown that potassium doesn't have much starter effect, as opposed to nitrogen and phosphorus. I mean, there is a response to the starter with potassium when the soil is deficient. Otherwise, nitrogen and P are the most important for the starter. Now, we also work with rich till. Rich till essentially is gone. I'm not sure if there is any in Iowa. There used to be a lot in Western Iowa, Northwest Iowa. So in rich till, with the phosphorus, there is no effect of the deep banding. We compared only broadcast and deep banding here. And we put the deep fertilizer was in the core of the ridge. But when we go to potassium, we see a huge impact. So for the deep banding. In soybean, just a little bit. So all this research shows that not difference then in P on K between broadcast and planter band, and a huge effect of deep banding in rich till. This is something that George Ream in Minnesota have seen too, and I didn't believe him when I started this research, because I said, why there be a response to potassium deep and not phosphorus in rich till? But this is what happened. You see, and we could explain it, but this is what we found. But there is not much rich till anymore. Okay, from 2002, we couldn't afford keep doing the deep banding. We have done it for many years. So we stopped it. We continued the broadcast and planter ban until about a year ago in this experiment. So what I show here, this is averages for the last 12 years. There's no deep band. So we have in the top corn yield, all these five, these are the 5 farms, the northeast, northern, northwest, southeast, southwest. And we have the rates of phosphorus that we apply. Here below we have soybean, okay? They were the same rates, the annual rates. We also put some rates every other year, but there wasn't much difference, so I'm not showing those. So here in this farm, we didn't have the high rate, 112 pounds per 2.5. In the other farms we did, but this high rate, we put only broadcast because it doesn't make sense applying all such high rate with a planter. So then if you look across here, the black points and full lines is the broadcast, okay? And the white dots with the dotted lines is the planter band. There is essentially no difference. This is what we found. Sometimes a little bit better the broadcast, sometimes a little better the planter. So we have not seen really a difference from that. And in some, in some of the fields, there was a huge response. In some, there was not much because of the soil test level, okay? Now, this is no till. We did exactly the same thing with tillage, but we got exactly the same result. So I'm not showing that, okay? Now, this is potassium, the same type of graph, corn in the top, soybean below. The full line and black points is the broadcast, and the open circles and the dotted line is planter band, and we don't see any difference, see, except in this, in this farm, for some reason, I still don't understand, the 70 pounds of K2O banded 2x2 reduce the soybean yield here a bit, okay? Not much the broadcast for other things. Now, this is important also for other things. Some people say that by banding, you can reduce the applied rate of P or K, okay? That may be the case in other states, in other planets, not here. We have so many experiments. You see, if that were the case, here, for example, we would see a difference between the rates, especially in the low rate. I put 35 pounds. Now, I didn't have any rate less than 35 pounds of K or 28 of phosphorus, you see, but we don't see that. So don't follow what some farm magazine says in other states, because that's not the case here. If you reduce the rate because you're banding, you will get hit with lower yields. Unless, of course, you are in high testing soil. If you apply P or K to high testing soil, of course, there will not be a difference because there is no response. Okay, now this lack of response to pre-plant fertilization with that few exceptions, it's not surprising in Iowa because we have little or no P or K fixation. Retention of P or K by soil doesn't mean fixation. We have good prairie soils that allow for large root system for P and K uptake. And then this issue that in no-till and in humid areas, broadcasting P or K is an horizontal banding and it's good because with higher residue in the top 2-3 inches and higher organic matter in those 2-3 inches, that increases the activity of the shallow roots and reduces so-called fixation. And I have seen this here, but other people, for example, in Alabama, early on, like 20 years ago, saw that. Now, it's true that sometimes we need some P mainly, and sometimes nitrogen in that root zone early, especially with high residue cover, very early plantings, cold spring, etc. But the use of starter, nitrogen or phosphorus, a small amount, combined with preplant broadcast fertilization is the most cost-effective way of dealing with that problem. But, okay, then what is that we say in our publication PM 1688 say? We say phosphorus, no placement difference for any tiller system other than to low start-to-peak rates for corn in a few conditions. Potassium, no placement difference with tillers, small benefits and inconsistent of deep banding with no-till and strip-till, but then large deep band potassium effects in rich till corn. That's what we say. Okay, so about 3 years ago, having done all these things and having experiments every year, finding exactly the same thing, of getting sick and tired and bored of that. So people have been asking me about potassium side dressing. And I never wanted to do it, but that finally I said, okay, I got some funding. So I said, let's work on that. Of course, nitrogen side dressing for corn is common. Phosphorus side dressing is very unlikely to work. I will not spend money and time on that because crops need phosphorus very early for cell multiplication, division, to get more leaves. And also the grain sink is determined very early, especially in corn. For potassium, I had my doubts. There is not much research with different preplant potassium rates, just a little bit in corn, but they were just side dress or not at different rates, but without different preplant K rates. And then in cotton, there was some research. Now, potassium is not much needed very early. That's why it doesn't have a starter effect, you know. Of course, if there is a deficiency, yes, it's needed, and there is very large potassium uptake later on. Then too much preplant or starter KCl risk salt injury, you see, that's known. I mean, especially with those fertilizers that like potash or others that have high salts index. And then one thing that happened in Iowa, one of the things about nitrogen side dressing is that because, of course, nitrate leaches, you know, so if there is lots of rain from the application until it's planted or a couple of weeks later, then the side dress nitrogen could help, but potassium doesn't leach much unless the soil is a beach sand. So I thought that side dressing potassium may work as a complement of pre-plant potassium fertilization. Now, of course, potassium needs soil moisture for good uptake. And I thought that dribbling to the surface or broadcast dry fertilizer may not be a good thing in dry years. So I thought that injecting fluid potassium, and especially with this low salt potassium acetate that has been around for a long time, but it was very expensive. Now it's cheaper, that maybe this could be an option. So this is what we did. We have 12 two-year trials in corn-soybean rotation. We began with corn, 6 trials began in 2017 and 6 in 2018. I wanted to have a study of year effect. One side was a no-till, the other was chisel plow, this for corn, and then for soybean, going to soybean, there was only disking, and in some, in a few, the soybean was planted no-till. So soil test potassium was low to very high on each trial. These are the typical organic matter and pH ranges in Iowa. We didn't have a calcareous soil here. And these are where the trials were, okay, with the soil series, okay. Okay, because it's tough to find low testing soils with K, except in some farmer fields in southern Iowa. We used some old experiments that were great for this purpose. So we have 5 pre-plant potassium treatments and 2 side-dress treatments, yes or no, with 4 replications. The reason I said because these were good, because these trials have 4 large plots that to which K was not applied for 6 to 8 years. So it was about very low to lower optimum. the potassium there, okay? I mean, within each site was uniform, but it was low to optimum across sites. But then there was one plot that we have kept applying broad cascade every year, pre-plant. So we have then some low testing plots and one plot with very high K, okay, one treatment, of course, 4 reps. So what we did, we applied the broadcast K rates was potash fertilizer, dry, before corn, but we applied nothing to the high testing plots. I wanted to know how those plots would yield with or without Sidedressed, okay? So for the plots that were low to optimum, depending on the site, we applied these 4 K rates, okay? Now the Sidedressed was yes or no. We use fluid potassium acid at 0.024, applied to both corn and soybean, okay, and to the same plots, okay? So all plots were subdivided, and then we applied this potassium Sidedressed to the same plots in the corn, and then in the second year, we reapplied again for soybean, and we did not apply again the broadcast rates. This is important. So we chose one rate. I didn't have money sufficient to compare several rates, 45 pounds K2O. And we injected to a depth of 4 to 5 inches at the B5 and 6 stage to the middle of each interrow, okay? That's the way it was done. Here I have a picture of 2 farms. This is corn on the left, this is soybean. You see, for the guys in the farm, it was a pain in the neck to moving the knives, the things that they normally have for sidedressing UAN. So what we did, we went twice over the plot. For example, here we apply between this interrow, but then in the other pass, we also apply in this other. So we injected in between all rows. And this is soybean. See, this is what we did. Okay, I'm gonna show, there will be a bunch of graphs like this, okay? I know they're complicated, but it's the best way of showing what happened in the 6 sites each year. We analyze potassium in the leaves and then also yield. So I will just explain with some detail this first chart because it's about the same in the rest. Okay, here we have the 6 sites, okay, in 2017. And this is leaf K, okay? We have leaf K here, leaf K here. And here we have the broadcast rates applied to those plots that I said have not had any K for a few years, and the high testing plots, okay? And remember the high testing plot, we did not apply any broadcast K, but we did apply yes or no Sidedressed, okay? That's what it is. Okay, so then here in red, I put what was the soil test K level for those plots where we broadcast K. So the initial soil test K was low here, very low here, very low to low, etc. Okay? And these are the responses. The dotted line and white circle is all these pre-plant treatments without Sidedressed, okay? And the black line with a black circle is when we injected the Sidedressed in addition to the pre-plant rate and also in the high testing plots that we didn't put any additional broadcast K. Okay. So if you look across, okay, you will see that there was a little bit effect of the potassium Sidedressed in increasing the leaf K concentration in some sites. In this case, there was only, in 2 sites, there was no difference at all. And, but there was a huge effect of pre-plant K on the leaf concentration, okay? So these same things were applied, I mean, the same graphs were, and methods were applied to the next. Okay, so this is corn grain yield, the 6 sites that we have in 2017, the first 6 sites. Again, the same thing as I explained. So I put with this blue horizontal line, okay, you will see it in three sites where the application of 45 pounds pre-plant was better or the same than 45 pounds applied by Sidedressed. You see, this is what we can compare. So here in the 0 pre-plant, we have only Sidedressed or not, but then here with 45, then we have this yield. So what this shows is that in this site, the efficiency of the 45 pounds applied pre-plant or Sidedressed, okay, was about the same. In this case, here were drought-affected soils. These were really bad yields because of drought. So you can see that in this side, there is a very small response to the Sidedressed, but nothing to the broadcast. And in this side, there was no response. But in these 3 sites, the 45 pounds applied pre-plant was more efficient than 45 pounds only applied at Sidedressed. Okay, that's what this shows. In 2018, these are the leaf potassium concentrations. I will not spend time. It was about the same thing that we found in the same year. There was some response to the leaf K in 3 sites here, 2 sites, and the other was very little. With yield in 2018, we didn't have any big drought. And yields were pretty good. Actually a bit above average of what it was in those farms. And the same thing, here we see that in this case, the 45 pounds applied Sidedressed yielded a bit more than the 45 pounds applied pre-plant, okay? In this case was about the same. I forgot to put the blue band here, the blue line. Then in these sites and in this one, there was a huge, especially here, that the 45 pound pre-plant was much more effective than the Sidedressed. And the other thing we see is that that I didn't say for the previous yield slide, is that applying 45 pounds pre-plant plus 45 pounds Sidedressed often was not better than just applying the 90 pounds pre-plant, okay? Okay, with soybean, there was a little bit more effect of the potassium Sidedressed on leaf K concentrations. Now, you need to remember here that the comparison of efficiencies between the Sidedressed and the 45 pounds pre-plant is not too valid because we did not reapply the broadcast rates, okay? These were the rates applied before the previous year corn, okay? So it's not that much fair, you know, because these 45 pounds were applied 2 years ago, and this was applied for the previous crop and for soybean too, okay? But I put here the soil test because now when we took soil samples and tested them before soybean, we see that, of course, the broadcast rates have changed the K levels, you know, when we had applied them before corn. So for example, these guys were very low, 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 and these guys were optimum, high, etc. Okay. So what we see here is that for leaf, there is a huge impact in most sites of the pre-plant rates that had been applied to the previous year corn, okay? And little effect, but more that we have seen in corn of the Sidedressed on the leaf concentration. And by the way, something I forgot to say that we saw also in corn, that even in high testing soil, you know, the leaf K was increased, you see. That's because we know that there is high luxury uptake of potassium into the vegetative tissues, you know. So even if the high testing soil we put potassium, that will go into the plant up to a certain limit. Okay, so yield remember when I said about the fairness of the comparison, because these broadcast rates were applied to the previous year only. So we see that when the pre-plant rate was low, of course there was some higher yield with the sidedressed, but that makes sense, you know, because this was the second crop. In 2019, the leaf concentration, I mean, was about the same. And there was one side that the impact was huge, and some others was small on the sidedressed. And then we see about the same thing, you know. In some sites, there was almost always a huge response to the residual K that had applied before corn, okay? And then there was some more response in soybean, you know, that we have seen in corn because the pre-plant Ks had not been applied, okay? So, given all that, what about potassium sidedressing then? Okay, the first thing I'd like to say is that we did not measure soil moisture, we couldn't afford, but we did record rain, okay? And we look at the amounts of rainfall and the patterns of rainfall. For example, how much rain was after the broadcast application, how much rain was before or after the planting or the sidedressing and so forth. And really that did not explain well the variation in response to sidedressed K. Only in those sites in 2017, in one site, that there was no response to the broadcast, but there was a little bit of response to sidedressed in yield, and that was because of the drought. And then by the time we applied the sidedressed K, the B5, B6, there had been some rain. So then we believe that that's why there was that little bit of response. I don't know. Okay, so it's clear what we saw is that sidedressing potassium fertilizer does not increase corn or soybean yield when the recommended pre-plant potash fertilizer rates are broadcast, okay? So, I mean, that was very obvious in all the research when we applied anywhere from 90 to 135 pounds. There was no response to the case sidedressed. Now we have 10 corn sites with some response, okay? Very low or very high. So when we look at what was the comparison between this same rate of 45 pounds applied either side pre-plant or sidedressed, okay? We saw that pre-plant K was more efficient at 5 for the site. Sidedressed, sometimes the difference was huge. Sidedressed was more efficient at 2 sites. That was in one site that it was affected by drought, and then another site that was very small. There was no difference between the 2 or 3 sites, even though there was a good response to the pre-plant. And then on average across the 10 sites, yield was 5.5 bushels higher for pre-plant K than for the sidedressed K. So what I conclude from this is that sidedressing K could be a good rescue option when not enough pre-plant K was applied, either in the fall or in the spring. But my question is, why would any farmer risk a soil K deficiency when they can apply efficient and low-cost broader K in the fall or in the spring? So the only reason that the only way that the sidedressed could pay is if there was not sufficient pre-plant K applied because they didn't follow our recommendation. Okay, so why they would do that? Okay, I understand that some people could not apply POK in a wet fall, but probably they could apply in the spring. So in my opinion, if potassium management is done, that is recommended to be sure that we have enough potassium there pre-plant and apply broadcast, which is the very low cost application. And we saw the broadcast is okay, you know, that it's not a problem. And so why would people do that? So that's what I say the sidedressed K could be useful as a rescue option, but not as a strategic thing to apply every year in any case. Now, I do have some questions that most likely some of you would ask me, and I'm not sure about the answer, okay? So what about different sidedress K rate? As I said, I didn't have enough funding. And then what about dribbling the sidedress fluid potassium acetate, either to the inter-row as we injected it, or using the white drop system. So I did ask funding, to do this, but I haven't got anything yet. Then what about sidedressing nitrogen and potassium together? Because some people sidedress nitrogen, some people sidedress potassium. Okay, this could be a good deal to do. I tried to get funding to do this, but I couldn't get it. I mean, I got for one site or two, but I'm not going to do anything with one site or two. We had two very recent 4-year trials with continued corn that we showed that potassium deficiency not only reduces corn yield, but can reduce the response to N. So sometimes it limits, a potassium deficiency limits the capacity of the corn to respond to the nitrogen applied. This is not the case for phosphorus, okay? With phosphorus, yes, if there is a deficiency, yields are low, but the capacity of the corn to respond to the other nitrogen doesn't change. So I doubt very much that this will be better, really, when we apply the recommended pre-plant K rates, Now, if there is for some reason there is not enough K applied pre-plant, then maybe this nitrogen K together maybe could work better than just the potassium or the nitrogen alone. I don't know. Now, the other issue I'd like to say is that bonding P or K rates larger than common starter rates seldom are better than broadcast for no-till and strip-till, and create a nightmare for soil sampling and testing. The spatial variability by bonding high P or K rates is a nightmare for soil sampling later on. You have to get 1 trillion soil samples, 1 trillion cores per composite sample, and then you should not trust too much the results because of the variability. And there has been lots of research from where to get the cores and the bands. It's nothing fixed. And then one thing that I thought that would help in these cases would be tissue testing, which helps sometimes because especially when you sample leaves, say at R1 or 2 or 3, something like that, then the roots are exploring more surface than a probe can do, more soil than a probe can do. But still, this banding of high rates creates problem. It doesn't increase yield usually, except in those exceptions that I said for the potassium. So then if there is no likely effect, especially for phosphorus, why doing it? That's my question. Okay, so you can reach me at this email address and the phone number. Now with the COVID thing, I'm told because I'm old and with diabetes, I should not go to campus too often. But and then this is the soil fertility website. We have tons of information that Dr. Sawyer especially worked in this website, and we have lots of information. You can go there. I need to recognize funding from Pioneer or Cortiva Agri-Science. This is some program that they have for research, and the Fluid Fertilizer Foundation. And then we got the potassium acetate fluid fertilizer from the Andersons in 2017, and then from Nature's in 2018 and 2019. And the potash fertilizer was donated by Nutrien, what used to be PCS.